Hi, everyone. Thanks for logging on and attending today. My name is Kevin Hospodar. I'm the Director of Marketing at Mindmatrix, and we are very lucky today to have a presenter of Peter Ostrow from SiriusDecisions. Peter is the Research Director for the Sales Enablement Service on the SiriusDecisions side. And today we're going to be talking about sales asset management. Good, Peter, if we can go to the next one. So a little bit about Mindmatrix. We are a platform that provides sales enablement and marketing enablement for direct sales, channel, and dealers, helping them sell more. We support sales and marketing teams as they try to navigate the entire buyer's journey from lead to revenue. And the thing that's pretty unique about Mindmatrix is in one platform, we are able to provide anything from PRM, channel marketing, channel sales enablement, asset management, sales enablement, and marketing automation. Today our focus is going to be more on the sales enablement side, and our presenter Peter here will take you through.
Great, thanks Kevin. Happy to join everybody today. What we'd like to do is start with the end, which is actually the final slide from my presentation. That'll show up for real a short while from now, but use it actually in the context of making it our agenda for today. So the takeaways, most importantly, we're going to start with what are the most important attributes for a sales asset management environment? What does good look like? That's a great question that folks ask all the time, and it kind of drives the way we do our research and investigations here at SiriusDecisions, especially when it comes to supporting the sort of technologies, platforms, best practices that support bicamerally your direct and channel sales organizations. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about content itself. What's the difference between an asset and a piece of content? Can a person be an asset? Does content refer to things that exist inside my organization, outside my organization? How do I handle it if I'm a disparate selling partner and the like? Then we're going to talk a little bit about tagging and library maintenance. This gets kind of into the weeds of sales asset management, but we know that a lot of folks come to us with questions that are at a very tactical level, as well as some of the strategies that we end up discussing in a lot of our inquiry calls with our customers. Then, guided selling. How do I make sure that my reps are spending as much time as possible doing what they should be doing, which is selling, developing, nurturing, and closing relationships? Whether they're on staff sellers or channel sellers, making sure that they spend as little time as possible not doing their job. And how do I integrate with the other technologies, whether they're learning-oriented, Salesforce automation-oriented, marketing-oriented, to make sure that their minute-to-minute experience is all guided and automated where appropriate, but also gives them the flexibility to construct great selling conversations where it's also necessary. Next, what should the dashboard look like? We'll talk about a little bit of the dials and gizmos and gadgets that are going to make most effective SAM deployment. And then finally, we'll sort of pepper through the entire conversation how channel-oriented sellers, because I know a lot of the folks who are joining us today have a decentralized selling model where it's less oriented towards W-2 sellers and more towards VARs, VADs, resellers, channel partners, and the like, and how those folks can benefit from the same best practices. So here at SiriusDecisions, we do a lot of research, and we end up coming up with some charts and graphs and numbers, as you can well imagine. This first one is from a recent survey that we did amongst our sales enablement service customers, and we basically are like, what's keeping you up at night, guys? What's going on? And as you can tell, the top two business issues for sales leaders and leadership and enablement folks are far and beyond much more significant than all of the others down below. The common theme, however, amongst all of these, not just focusing on better conversations and the time element that I mentioned a moment ago, is all about competencies. Our reps don't know what they need to know. They don't have the skills that they need to have. They're not having the right conversations. They're not supporting their conversations with the buyers at the various inflection points of the buyer's journey with the right type of content, the right type of messaging. They just, they're floundering here and there, and they're not closing their business fast enough or well enough. Of one point of interest is actually, if you look all the way at the bottom of the screen, the least most important issue is lack of quality leads from marketing. Personally, I'm actually pretty excited to see that because, that's a complaint that all of us have either heard or delivered, since time immemorial. And it's nice to see that organizations are kind of beyond that at this point. But the business of sales enablement is one that accrues to everybody inside the organization, whether or not you directly sell sales. I think we all, whether we live in a nonprofit or for-profit, any kind of a public or private entity, need to support the revenue acquisition process. Therefore, making sure that these issues can be addressed and resolved, it's really the business case for all of what we do on a day-to-day basis. So let's talk a little bit about sales content. In a recent survey, we asked buyers of technologies, hey, from the winning versus the runner-up rep, how did you interact with them? What did you look at? And here we see that almost 4 out of 5 of the organizations that we surveyed told us that the content that they received directly from their rep, not from the marketers, but directly from the rep, was very or extremely important to their final and ultimate decision making. Now let's take a look at another piece of data that accompanies this. A slightly lower percentage, but still 2/3 of companies told us that the rep themselves, the interaction that they have with the human being, is very or extremely important. Now these were stats associated with the winning rep. The runner-up rep numbers were a little bit lower. So, what's the lesson that we learned from this here? Everybody talks about content in context. So both elements are crucial and important for buyers in order to sort of consume what the sellers are throwing at them. For direct sales organization, this means that the content producers and the skills developers need to coordinate how we train our reps to communicate and then what we give them to communicate with. For channel managers, they actually have the opportunity to sometimes deliver both the content and interaction from the same centralized platform. Sales enablement involves 2 things from our perspective, both the external content that is used to bring buyers through their journey, but also the internal empowerment and learning content that's used to help reps understand what to do, what to say, how to self-educate. And considering the science out there on the forgetting curve, in air quotes that I'm doing here, Kevin, that we see 87 to 93% of traditional sales training forgotten, if not reinforced, within 30 days, it's very important for folks who are enabling sellers to realize that both of those paths, the internal and external content, are crucial. So to that point, let's take a look at one of our fun models that we have here in our sales enablement service, and I use the term fun loosely, but when you're in the nerdy analyst business, you do get excited about this stuff. So let's take a look at this model, which we call the Sales Content Architecture Framework, and let's bring it to life. First, we're all pretty familiar with the buyer's journey. Here at SiriusDecisions, we break it down into 3 major components: the education, solution, and selection phases of a buyer's journey as we try to get them to consume and buy our goods and our services. So that kind of makes sense. Now, the outcomes that we seek from the buyer at each of these stages of the journey are also fairly predictable. We want them to ask for information and ask for a proposal and to accept it and move this thing along to signature as quickly as possible before my month or quarter ends and I haven't hit my number. So it also tends to follow that the salespeople also have their own stages that they need to be aware of. So what you're starting to see here is the vertical alignment that's so important so that sellers, as they move with their buyers through the journey, also go through the right processes of guided selling or sales methodologies, whatever the terminology is that you feel is most appropriate, in order to help that buyer move as quickly as possible. Now, through the lens of content, which we started to discuss a moment ago, let's fill in the middle in 2 very different ways. First, we have all the traditional content that we use to activate buyers. And in the education and the solution and the selection phases of the buyer's journey, there's different requirements that they have for knowledge. We need to provide the right assets and resources so that the interactions that buyers have with our content and our assets and our messaging and ourselves produces the right outcomes so that they move themselves through the cadence at an appropriate pace. But we also refer to empowering the seller, another flavor of content, because while most of us are familiar with the need to baby walk a buyer through their journey content-wise, most of us just show up and throw up when it comes to sales training. That's not how top-performing companies handle it. By understanding that the seller needs to work through the buyer's journey in tandem with them, smart companies and high-performing companies that we see here consistently divide all of their sales enablement content, the empowerment content that helps teach reps what they need to know, at the same sort of cadence that the buyers go through their journey. In so doing, organizations are actually able to combine the activation content and the empowerment content into a single sales asset management delivery or platform, and they use it for both direct and channel sellers alike. So next, Kevin, here's an interesting stat that we have in our research, which is scary to a lot of people. Nearly 2/3 of the content that marketers create is never used by sellers, and they're not putting it in front of their buyers. So when we go a little deeper and ask why is that the case, and that kind of flies off to the left-hand side there for some reason, because we can't find the content, we can't use the content, I don't know where it is, it's not right, I can't personalize it. So what happens? A lot of folks tend to go rogue. And so the symptoms of a problem that we tend to see often in organizations look like this. First of all, if I'm an individual contributor or a channel partner, there's too much stuff out there. You know, how come I don't have the Amazon shopping experience where after one or maybe 2 clicks at most, there's the perfect number of options for me? Scientists will tell you that it's maybe 6 or 8 or 10 options, but it's not one, which makes me feel like I'm not shopping effectively enough. It's not 1,500, which just drives me crazy. So that's the problem with a lot of organizations. They have too much content, but no one owns the content. I don't know where to go to find the person who says, oh yes, this is the current version, or it's not the current version, or here's where you go for the current version. So what do I do as a rep or partner? I just make my own. I go through my own workarounds and I create it, and I figure, you know what, eventually I'll ask for forgiveness since I'm not bothering with permission. So what happens as a result? Because I'm not really in touch with anything but my own short-sighted deal management, I'm not aligning the content properly with the buyer's journey, and most importantly, I'm not capturing the metrics that I need to have that tells me what's working and what's not working. So we see a lot of organizations out there with some pretty serious problems. We actually just got some brand new data, which literally just dropped on my desk, and I can share some of that with you guys. Our latest sales asset management data just came in like yesterday. Here's a couple of astounding facts. We asked companies, how many different places do your reps need to go to find the stuff they need to do their job? And 62% of organizations say that reps have at least 6 or more different places where they go. That's not a very effective utilization of their time. And here's another one when we talk about time. We asked, how many hours does your typical rep spend per month looking for content, massaging the content, repurposing the content, instead of just getting it or having it find them, and then they get to work with it. 47% of companies said that reps spend at least 20 hours a month not doing their job, looking for stuff, working through the stuff, doing all of this, self-designed work that we're talking about here on this particular slide. And finally, here's another stat, Kevin, is that only a third of companies, 33% exactly, bother to correlate their wins and their losses with the content that was presented to those particular buyers. So what we have a lot of here is the lack of sales enablement, but we fortunately have both research and customer interactions that have taught us a lot about best practices when it comes to sales asset management and the proper guidelines for deploying and purchasing and working through how to integrate these technologies. So for this chapter, let's start with understanding. We talked earlier about the things that keep sales enablement leaders up at night. What are they doing about it? Here's a representation of the top initiatives that sales enablement professionals are embarking on when it comes to their project work, all their different work streams that they often will talk to us here at SiriusDecisions about that we help them with. So what's interesting about this slide is most of these values involve a verb. I want to improve, I want to deploy, develop, or implement. But right here in second place, sales asset management solution purchase is way beyond the verb. It's already a noun. We need to buy this thing. It's not that we need to look into it, we need to fix something. It's like we already need to buy it. That's representative of a situation where the market is much more mature than a lot of the other sectors that we look at. It's a very busy environment. There's a lot of very strong solutions that are consistently seeing the opportunity to try to out-innovate one another. So frankly, it's a buyer's market right now. It's a great opportunity to do this. But we need to make sure that we start in the right place and that we deploy appropriately, so we've got some guidance around that. So for a lot of organizations, when they look at sales asset management deployments, if they're a direct organization, it's not so difficult because they usually have folks who are already dealing sort of with the content in the library. But for folks who are running a channel environment, there's another thing that they need to think about, and that is, what's the future roadmap changes for our organization in terms of who we work with, and what are we going to be deploying in terms of different partnerships and different types of solutions that we represent. In either case, whether you're supporting a channel from the corporate perspective in the OEM, or whether you are, content or marketing or sales enablement leadership for a direct sales organization, it's crucial to understand what do we need, what's out there, what can we do, and who can help us, both from a vendor perspective, also, with organizations like us, because we provide guidance to folks in a lot of these scenarios. So just by way of definition, let's make sure that everyone here is on the same page about what is a sales asset. First of all, it's more than just content. It's not just the PDFs and videos and files that people can store, that they can retrieve, that they can push to reps in a guided selling environment. It also involves human beings, subject matter experts inside our company, or folks who partner organizations can refer to make sure that they are getting the right guidance from someone who has a very specific amount of expertise in an area that they may not be as fluent in. It also means things like competitive intelligence, all those feeds that we attach to our Salesforce automation platform that allows us to know what's going on with our prospects and our buyers, often in nearly real time. Similar to that is account intelligence, other types of subscriptions and drips and feeds that tell us what we need to know about the bigger picture, the financial, the merger and acquisition, the people coming and going, and things of that nature that we need to be aware of so that we have smarter conversations, which was one of those top issues that organizations face that we mentioned earlier. We also finally think about online calculators, value actualization tools. All of these things are assets that need to be addressed beyond just the content when you're actually thinking about a sales asset management environment. The reason for this is because you've got a lot of different things that you deal with that are designed to support the reps, and if you think outside the box and it's not just files but actually resources, the concept of asset becomes a lot more helpful, and you're enabling salespeople from a much better perspective. For you folks who are channel providers out there, there's a couple of other elements when it comes to things like deal registration, deal delivery, compliance governance, and things like that, that also in an ideal situation will become part of that sales asset management discussion. So then folks talk about getting their assets in order. And a few questions here. I'll just kind of pop all of these up, Kevin, because I think most folks can understand why it's important to have all of these in place. Are a lot of questions that folks need to ask. The things that we often see when folks start thinking about the audit of their content, and we'll talk about that audit process and best practices in a short while, is, what do we have? What do we need? What's out there? What's good? What's not good? And what are the crucial things that we actually see that we recommend to organizations is when they are beginning this process is to be all-encompassing and holistic about where their assets currently live. Not just the stuff that marketers or channel managers have developed, but all that rogue stuff that's out in the field that reps are using that you may or may not actually know about. So we see organizations kind of having I joke about this, like a gun buyback program, All right, everybody, for the next 3 weeks, we're going to have full amnesty. Show us all the content that you're using out there that you think is helpful or that you know is helpful to your own deals. We promise we won't judge, but after 3 weeks, we need to work together a little bit more on this, and there's a reason why we, maybe if we are the marketing ownership of the content, need to make sure that brand control and compliance are properly executed on. So once assets are in order, we start to think about where do they fit into the entire life cycle of their journey through our organization as we use that content to educate our sellers and to move our buyers through their own journey. So when we talk about the sales asset life cycle, there's a lot of components here. Just a couple of words on each of them, and then Kevin, I know you have a couple of things you were going to mention after this slide. So when we talk about creating content, one piece of guidance that we give to customers is when you're launching a new environment, a sales asset management platform, environment, library, access, make sure there's some fresh content that's going out with it. It's one thing to say, hey everybody, all the content that you kind of don't pay attention too much to right now, this stuff is now available in a new place where you're still going to ignore it. Meh. But if you actually go out to your sellers and your partners and say, hey, guess what? We have some brand new content that's specific to this vertical or this new product line or blah, blah, blah. And by the way, you're going to see this new content in an entirely different fashion that's much more user-friendly. You're going to be a lot more likely to have buy-in from and utilization of the assets from the sales assets management from the sales team members themselves. Then we talk about storing content. A better word for that might actually be find. I can't find it, I can't use it are the phrases that we hear over and over again from sellers and from sales enablement leaders who are frustrated with their lack of ability to properly create and store content. Findability is everything, although obviously in an ideal setting, and we'll talk about this shortly, when the content can find their rep where they live in the context of their deals, and regardless of what device they're using, regardless of whether they're connected or not, that's the ideal scenario for a true sales asset management deployment. That being said, As easy it is to find something in the best search you've ever used, whether it's just plain Google or within any particular app or website, you need to replicate that user experience so that the sellers are spending as little time as possible looking for stuff, like the stat we mentioned earlier, and more time actually doing their jobs. When it comes to management, this is a precursor for the tagging discussion that we'll have shortly. When we talk about content, finding the reps, this is the way you make that happen. So in a scenario that actually exists today, and we see some of our customers at this advanced stage, happens something like this. I'm a rep, and I'm selling for my company, and I open up an opportunity in my Salesforce automation platform. Or I decide to compose an email in my Outlook or Gmail client or some other application that supports email. And right then, what happens? Things start happening to me. Just like the auto suggestions that you get when you're composing an email that helps you dig through your list of contacts, a great SAM environment will actually understand that the opportunity that you're working, the person that you're emailing, the company that they work in, and when machine learning is thrown into the mix, what kind of deal that I'm working on and what kind of content is most likely to help make that deal happen, both the learning content for my own needs as well as the external activation content that the buyer sees, it serves all that up to me. I don't have to go looking for anything. I can stay right inside my email or the Salesforce automation platform or the native SAM platform, wherever I'm most comfortable working, and it all guides me towards here's what you want to think about using, customize it, shoot it out. You never have to open up the opportunity in the Salesforce automation platform, or you never have to go back to your email. They all connect to one another, as well as the marketing automation platform that starts to track the analytics about whether or not the buyer and recipient of that content is actually engaging with it. Then at the deliver stage, this is all about flexibility, making sure, as we'll talk shortly about the integration with Salesforce automation and other platforms, delivery has to be mobile friendly and it has to be social friendly, because more and more of our sellers are very comfortable and native in those languages, and we need to make sure that we speak the language that they do. When it comes to sharing, this is why it's so important that SAM environments include a collaborative environment, so that thumbs ups and thumbs downs and user-generated content, what's working for you might not work for me, but what's working for me might very much help work for you, that we have that built into the environment. And then finally, the measurement is all about the analytics and the opportunity to understand what's being opened, what's being consumed, what's being forwarded, and to bring all of that data right back to the opportunity level so that we understand with less and fewer hands tied behind our backs what's working and what's not, and what's motivating buyers through their journey, and what content actually deserves to be part of that bunch of stuff that marketing creates that doesn't work with buyers. No one hits it out of the park every time, and no marketing campaign or asset is likely to work all the time, and all of them are not likely to work. So identifying which is strong and which is not, that's a ticket towards great SAM environments. So Kevin, over to you. I know you had a couple things you wanted to mention at this point.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. Lots of great information there. And kind of going back onto some of them too, you mentioned the 65% of sales reps. I mean, a lot of 65% of the content that sales reps should be using, they can't even find and they don't use. We've actually seen that in some of our client base and in our surveys as high as 80 or 90%. So that's, I mean, 9 out of 10 pieces of content that are sitting there that marketing's creating and they're being developed and money's being spent that are just going unused. You also mentioned the 62% of people who are looking at 6 or more places. That really goes into our philosophy, is that we're not a point solution. We're not looking to bring our clients into those 6 different locations. If it's all in one place, it makes it much easier for them to find the content. It makes it much easier for them to use the content. So on the direct sales side, that's sales reps that are enabled and can do their job better and be more effective. And on the partner side, that your partners are out there and they have the content and they have the pieces that they need. This also, the idea of a platform instead of the point solutions really allows the sales and marketing team to do what we were talking about on the last slide there of measurement. It's one thing to actually use content, but it's another thing to be able to optimize and have that visibility and to know what content's working or what messages are working, and to turn that back around and to feed it back into the life cycle and of content development and really develop content that works. So really big on that closed loop reporting that we saw on that previous slide.
Yeah, agreed. So that's actually a good chance for us to delineate for folks who are maybe a little bit earlier in their journey, core versus advanced capabilities for sales asset management environments. So when we look at the core capabilities here, Let's just run through these relatively quickly. Some of it might be fairly well known to some of our guests, but it's always good to make sure that we have the least common denominator addressed. So when it comes to sales content preparation, a great SAM environment and the users of that environment, whether they're obviously the admins, the sellers, the channel partners, etc., should allow a rep to locate and prepare and catalog their own assets so that they're really easy to find during a client meeting or presentation, or even if they're just sending them through the mail. Content and management and distribution means a simple interface for content creators so that they can manage and distribute content. Let's remember that in an ideal environment, folks are creating in whatever environment is most comfortable for them, just the way we want sellers to do their workflow wherever they're more comfortable. Giving them options is it's both the bane and the boon for app developers worldwide. For reps, when it comes to content management and distribution, they've got to be able to bookmark or identify stuff for future reference, and the ability to either download it or attach it, create a portal for it so that it gets to the buyer in any appropriate fashion and as quickly as possible. Content presentation, that's again all about making sure that the tool allows the rep to show what they need to show wherever, however, connected or not, whether they're on a factory floor, whether they're in a field with agricultural equipment being what they sell, whether they're doing a software demo, and the best attributes of these core attributes of SAM environments have that in place. And reporting and analytics, we just can't often enough. I think, Kevin, you and I are going to probably drumbeat this throughout the rest of the hour today, talk about how important it is to know what's working and what's not working. For companies that feel like they have this stuff in place, we've got a few advanced capabilities that help us reduce that awful 65% number that we talked about earlier. Just very briefly as we go through this, content customization. Let's face it, marketers are not in the field as much as sellers, and they're not in front of buyers as much as sellers. Hopefully they are on a regular basis. I'm a big proponent of that. But sellers need to have the opportunity to control certain elements of the content that they can customize to their individual buyers and individual companies' needs, while again having the content creators, usually in marketing for the buyer-facing content, still be able to control appropriately the right elements. And right down to an individual slide level, we see SAMs empowering admins to control certain elements on a slide and opening up others for reps to customize. When it comes to generating RFPs, to some extent, an RFP is an asset, and it's also a piece of content, but most organizations don't think a lot about how good their RFP responses and their contracts that go out to buyers are. So the same sort of best practices that help a rep understand what to do and what to say in the selling process can also be used when it comes to responding to RFPs. Even a formal internal deal desk that supports, let's say, a lot of channel partners with responding to RFPs can benefit from the same sort of environment. And the rest of these things, making sure that it's social friendly, that you can customize emails from the tool, that it obviously works with the guided selling piece that we mentioned earlier, those are all wicked important when it comes to making sure that the advanced capabilities of a SAM environment are in place. So one thing that we often get asked is, do I really need this? Is it a nice to have or is it a must-have technology? So it's always worth talking and thinking about the costs versus the benefits of any investment that we make. On the cost side, you've got to understand that you're going to be paying for a formal provider to implement it and to integrate it. You're also going to have, in most cases, a subscription or SaaS environment where there will be ongoing costs. There's also support resources. No matter what, anyone would like a great piece of complex enterprise software that helps sellers and channel partners do their job as so much more effectively as we're discussing today, doesn't happen in a 12-hour time frame. And the support that's involved needs to be part of what companies budget for when they're looking at a SAM environment. But the benefits, of course, are many. The productivity gains, and this is something that can only be understood if it is measured before and after the deployment. There's also the opportunity cost of not doing anything. Business prognosticators worldwide always like to talk about, inertia and what if you, don't do something and what's the real cost of it. Well, I can tell you from an employment perspective, we know right now that roughly 3 to 4% of top performing salespeople, B2B salespeople, are looking for work. Only 3 to 4% of folks who hit their number the last couple of years tell SiriusDecisions that they're looking for a job. So that means that 96 to 97% of the people that we're likely to look at, they're really not the best salespeople. So if we have good folks on staff, do we really want to not support them with the strongest tools, the best knowledge, skills, and processes that we possibly can to make sure that they have the opportunity to do their job pretty well. System replacement can actually be a cost and a benefit, and it's worth understanding that there is drag and there is friction involved in changing anything, and it's worth making sure that we understand clearly not just the physical downtime of people's access to content, but the time that it takes to learn, to migrate, to upload apps, to customize, and do all those things. Generally well worth it for something that's going to save the time in terms of hours and the number of places where people need to look that we mentioned at the top of the hour, but it's always worth considering. And then finally, the adoption piece. There's no such thing as 100% adoption of just about any business application. So we don't encourage folks to make adoption one of their KPIs. I don't think anybody ever got promoted to Chief Sales Officer because they increased adoption of the Salesforce automation platform. But making sure that the adoption that you're likely to see, and as a hint, make sure that your selection committee includes some folks from the field, is going to be strong enough to make the whole thing worthwhile. All right. So, Kevin, what I'd like to do now is talk about what great looks like. We have a few outcomes here, and then I'll present just verbally some more statistics that just came in yesterday, actually, from this new research piece that I was talking about. First of all, a great sales asset management environment, regardless of the technology that supports it, more about the processes that you use to support it and the knowledge that people bring to the table. Make sure that the content is always aligning with both the buyer needs, which we're all pretty familiar with, but also the seller needs. If a seller is often throwing late stage content at a buyer too early in their journey, they have not been properly enabled. If a seller is having very early stage presentation, company overview type of content discussions with someone who's ready to sign, there's also a cognitive dissonance there, and you're not going to make the sale. So that alignment is crucial, and the SAM environment should make that happen in a somewhat or majorly automated fashion. Next, that the assets we have to be able to find it, use it, and measure what's working. That's a no-brainer set of requirements for any SAM environment. Next, that the content finds the rep at the time of need, where they are. If I open an opportunity, if I change the % likelihood to close, if I compose an email, that the system, integrated with all the other back-end systems, actually spies on me, so to speak, and knows what I'm doing. And because of all the tagging that's been done in the background, understands how important it is to serve me up the learning and the buyer-facing content that I need at that exact moment in time. And one important note is that when we talk about tagging, it can't just be from the perspective of the portfolio marketers who legitimately come to this situation saying, hey, we need to make sure that all of our content is tagged with, which product is being sold, which buyer persona is associated with that solution, but also the sales-centric tags, like where in the buyer's journey is this particular asset most likely to have the impact. And how do we know that? From the machine learning that takes place behind the scenes in the SAM environment. We also need that closed-loop feedback. If we don't want to have 65% of our marketing-produced content ignored, we're going to actually take some feedback and learn from the field and hopefully use the system and the analytics therein to learn so and to make better decisions over time. A SAM has to improve rep productivity. SiriusDecisions customers for our sales enablement service and our sales ops service actually go through a sales activity study with us each year. And we look at a whole variety of reps, and we just look at how are they spending their time. Have they made any movements of the needle since they've been working with us, for instance, on more time facing buyers, less time on non-core activities? How many minutes should someone spend on submitting their expenses until you get to the point of, wait a minute, this person's not selling, they're doing busy work. So, when you aggregate that out and you look at all the different things that a rep needs to do to get their job done, some are buyer facing, some are not, some are core, some are not, the SAM has to contribute to an increase in productivity. And finally, what works for winning deals? That's the important part of the analytics and hopefully the machine learning that your SAM environment, if and when you implement one, will allow you to understand, and in a way that grows in its intelligence over time, sort of like the Borg if you're a Star Trek fan. I'm not really that much of a nerd, so I kind of understand the concept of the Borg, Kevin, but I don't. All right, I'm not a Trekkie. Okay, I just said it. I've just put it out there for everybody. All right, so if this is what the outcomes look like, what does great look like? And some data just hit me yesterday, and so think about the different ways in which you can think of high-performing organizations. We know that companies with 10% or less voluntary sales turnover over a 2-year time, that their reps look in far fewer places for content than companies with higher turnover. What about sales cycle? That's one of the key lagging indicators that a lot of folks want to try to control. If we could just shrink our sales cycle by a couple of percentage points, everything else will fall into place. So companies whose sales cycle over the last 2 years has remained unchanged or got shorter, those organizations actually tell us that their reps look in far fewer places for content and they spend fewer hours per month, the other metric that we looked at earlier, trying to find stuff and customize stuff. And finally, what about the percentage of your reps who are on quota? We also learned just yesterday that companies who report that 80% or more of their reps have hit their quota in the last measured calendar or fiscal year, they also are looking in far fewer places. I think it was 30-something% fewer places for content than companies with reps who are not. So by a variety of different performance metrics, organizations that are performing well are spending less time and looking in fewer places, and obviously the SAM is the way to get to that point. So, Kevin, just wanted to share a couple of more items, then we'll talk about deployment and configuration. Then I know you've got some content for us as well. 2 slides here, folks, worth of 8 very important capabilities of a sales asset management environment. Your SAM needs to be able to store it from a perspective of either centrally storing various assets and pieces of content that are coming at it from around the enterprise, or point to all of the other, Dropbox, SharePoint, Box, Jive, all the different content management platforms and collaboration platforms that are out there, and be an agnostic application, meaning that reps can work in the SAM environment, or they can never be in the SAM environment, but it'll still support them in exactly the same way. Delivery to reps, obviously, as we mentioned earlier, is so crucial so that they can consume what they need for their own learning or use with the buyers with as seamless a transition as possible. They can find it, they can customize it, it finds them, they can customize it, they send it, they move on, and then they get an alert when they understand that something has actually happened from the standpoint of buyers engaging with their content. Sharing with buyers, as we mentioned earlier, has to be as easy as opening an email, turning on their tablet device, firing up their phone, or conducting a web conference, and using the tool in any way, shape, or form to share the content, get the buyers in feedback on the content, and understand from the measurement and performing perspective when buyers are actually interacting with exactly that same content. A few more pieces of capabilities, and then we'll talk about deployment. This is actually where we start to see how important it is for the content creators, the content managers, and the integrators of the SAM with all of the other systems to make sure that they are on the ball when it comes to all the flexibility that a company needs. When we talk about SFA integration, this involves a lot of different ways in which understanding where do our reps live. If your reps are pretty strong and using the SFA, then it's a great idea to make sure that your SAM provider has built-in integration already, not just potential connectors, or we can do that if you need it for us, but they're already in place to make sure that the reps can work inside the Salesforce automation platform and everything gets recorded back to the SAM. Or they can do so in email. It all ideally should be connected, and we've got a chart for that coming up, Kevin, in just a few minutes. Then finally, from a content management, creation, and packaging perspective, I think we've discussed a lot of these items. It's why it's so crucial to make sure that the full-fledged nature of the SAM that folks choose and the questions that they ask of their potential providers are all properly in place. All right, so our last chapter today, folks, and I know we've got a couple of Q&As that are coming in, a couple of questions that have come from some of our audience members. So, Kevin, we can attack those when we're done. Let's just talk a little bit about deployment and configuration of a great SAM environment. So when you deploy a SAM, it's actually kind of interesting. There's 4 major steps that don't have as much to do with technology as they have to do with the need to actually kind of sell this internally inside the organization. First of all, and this is just like a lot of initiatives, the bigger the company, the more you have to look inward and create some of the optics that are going to help this thing succeed. No matter how good your intentions are, no matter how much you've gamed out the likelihood that everybody will adopt it, everybody will use it, like a lot of different enablement initiatives, whether you're doing so for on-staff sellers or for channel partners, you need to build support, and that means going up the food chain to executive leaders, getting project sponsors to get those folks engaged, maybe have some communications come out from them, to have a very specific calendar, and even using the SAM itself, ironically, to have a team site where folks can learn about what it's going to mean for them and how it'll impact their daily lives. Then a little bit of internal marketing, making sure that everybody who is involved with the project committee is down on this exact same elevator pitch, being willing to use some guerrilla or viral marketing approaches to popularizing this inside the organization. Communicating with folks using video and other rich media to do so is also very helpful. When we roll it out, no one likes to come off of the front line and train, so we've got to make sure that whether we do it in a classroom environment, at sales kickoff, if we do it in an asynchronous e-learning type of environment, that it's very user-friendly, that it says, hey, here's what this environment is all about, here's why we did it, here's what's in it for you, and that folks can train at the appropriate pace as opposed to whether or not you want it required or optional, but that there's a cadence that they can set up for themselves, and that all the best practices in adult learning come to bear. And finally, to post-deployment, we're all pretty used these days to being asked by folks who sell us goods and services, how did I do? Did I earn a 10 on my survey? I was just at the car dealership over the weekend, and the woman there was saying, hey, we're going to send you the survey. If I get anything less than a 10, I'm going to get in trouble, but, I want you to know if I get anything less than a 10. That's crucial to make sure that we get that ongoing leadership support and the rest so that the deployment is as smooth as possible. Then it's time to figure out, okay, once we've got the schedule in place and we know how we're going to market and communicate this thing internally, let's go back to that buyer's journey for a second and let's figure out where our content is or isn't strong. So if we compress the sales content architecture framework that we discussed earlier into just this chronological cadence of the buyer's journey and the sales cycle stages that accompany them, then, and this is just sample data, we see a lot of organizations taking a very objective look at all the stuff that they have in hand. The green, yellow, red are just sample assignments of hot, medium, or cold quantities and qualities of their current sales assets that they have in place. This type of representation is often fairly common, though, where organizations put a lot more effort into providing content, both learning internal content and external buyer-facing content early in the sales cycle. They're not as good often in the middle and late stages of the sales cycle. We often see that content audits, which we'll discuss in the very next slide, often turn up the biggest gaps when it comes to the mid and late stages, or the solution and selection phases of the buyer's journey. So speaking of which, what is an asset? So we spoke about earlier how assets can be people, they can be files, a lot of different things. When we look at a content audit, all the different content types that an organization has in hand should fall into a very elaborate and carefully crafted scorecard that takes these 4 evaluation criteria into consideration. When it comes to quality, how much does this particular asset relate to our current standards, the overall corporate image that we want to have in place right now? If it's not compliant, it doesn't mean we toss it out, but we need to think about whether the work involved in making it compliant is worthwhile. What about relevance? Do reps actually use it at a particular point in the buyer's journey? How relevant is it to the outcome that we want? If something is really focused on how easy our product is to implement, are we using it at the right point of the buyer's journey where they're thinking about that, or the wrong point? And so making sure that the tagging as well as the auditing of the content comes into play. The value, whoops, sorry about that, Kevin, I clicked forward by accident. The value of a piece of content is also important. From the buyer's perspective, does it represent something that I could find on my own or can only be provided to me by my rep because it's proprietary, or more importantly, and more hopefully, it's unique and I'm not getting this type of content or information from somebody else. It's important for sales enablement leaders to consider limiting the availability of some of the more valuable content by gating it or having reps only share it with highly qualified buyers. Finally, we have influence, and this is what is the relevance of this particular piece of content or an asset on what our buyer thinks about us. That's obviously going to get into the analytics piece that we talk about frequently and often with our customers. And again, one reminder, if you guys are a channel-centric sales environment, the rogue content that we talked about earlier is far more prevalent amongst channel-centric sales organizations and decentralized selling teams. And it doesn't mean that the rogue content is any better or worse, or that risk gets slapped any more or less, but it's just a matter of facing reality. Folks are going to do what it takes to make their own personal number, and if that means not always complying with what we've done at the corporate level, maybe that's not so bad, but let's learn from what they're doing well and help them around the ways that it's going to be most appropriate for them. So finally, when we talk about tagging, as we sort of go through this entire circle of life here, when you tag content, it's not just about the product, it's not just about the buyer persona, but it's also about where the buyer is. It could be about the type of rep who is selling for us, could be the industry that they're working in. It could be as simple as a market or cultural specific type of content. But the more that the SAM allows us to tag something with, here is where or how or in what situation a piece of content or an asset is likely to be effective, the more easy it is for that stuff to turn up when a rep searches, and the more easy it is when the automated guiding selling piece comes into play, and the systems together suggest to the reps what they should send and what they should learn. And then finally, Kevin, then I'll take a quick break, and I know you've got some content for us as well. How do we work with the different performer groups in our organization? We all understand that we have A players and B players and none of the above players, but it's important when we're thinking about the content audit and then the cleaning house of our content library and then moving forward with understanding that it's so important to just create and deploy content that works. Let's make sure that we get the ideas from the strongest performers about what kind of content they've used, what kind of content they haven't used, and let's be objective about making sure that we try to weight things more towards the former and less than the latter. This allows us to move the middle performers up the needle a little bit and make those folks more successful because we're empowering them with better learning. They're going to know more, they're going to have better skills in place, and they're going to have better customer-facing content that helps them seal the deals. We're not likely to change the top performers' performance, but we can leverage their experience to move the widest band of performers. And as we all know as managers, it's not a fun thing, but some folks aren't going to be making their number. And so ultimately, the content that they're using is probably not the most effective. In fact, Kevin, it may be the content that we want to double think about retiring. If there's a lot of content that's dramatically associated with poor performers or lost deals, that's a very clear indication that not every single piece of content, not every asset is going to work out there. Getting that feedback from channel partners is especially important in a decentralized environment, because those folks don't naturally take the time to say, hey, I just wanted to shoot this email off to corporate to let you know that something's not working, or my rep who's not performing all that well is using a lot of these content assets. So having the system being able to track that stuff automatically, that's crucial for a great SAM deployment.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Peter. Yeah, we've gone through now. You've got great tips on doing the content audit, creating content, tagging content in those user groups. And all that kind of comes to a head when we start talking about persona-based asset management. How do we take that content that we've created, that marketing has gone and created hyper-focused content through the audit? How do you give it to the right salespeople? And how do you make sure that it's not a distraction to the segment of the sales team that doesn't need it, but how is it readily available so we can break out of that 65% of just lost content out there? And by setting up personas and by spending a lot of time in this persona development, it really gives the salesperson the right content when they need it. If all the sales and marketing people know, segmentation is key whenever you look at your database, but this is an internal look at segmenting your sales team. And what a good platform will do is allow pretty much endless customization. You could do it on user profiles on the direct or indirect side. You can do it for regional specific. You can do it for language. It can be anything that could be set as a variable to meet your business needs. And what it really allows for you to do is to give that hyper-focused content in a small, easy-to-manage library, and it makes it so your sales teams and your channel, your indirect, everyone who's out there has access to the content when they need it and can find it right away. And I think that Peter's got a good example here of just how you can start to set up those personas and how you can use that persona-based system to really deliver good content.
Yeah, and here it is, Kevin. So this sort of just builds, and it's all kind of sample data, but the whole idea is a salesperson is not a monolithic single type of creature. Every channel partner is not exactly the same as others. We're all special snowflakes, if you will, but more importantly, there's a lot of different ways in which people who carry a quota are eventually going to get their job done. And all of these different attributes that you see here baked into the different sales personas can all be used to figure out how do I actually prioritize what kind of assets I produce, what kind of assets I distribute, and how I make sure that I support the folks most likely to help me drive my own number here at corporate by making sure that they're empowered with the learning and the skills and the training and, of course, the buyer-facing assets that they need. These are just samples here, but I'm sure most of you folks out there have organizations with similar breakdowns, even if the terminology is not exactly the same or the numbers or quotas aren't the same. So this is just presented to you as an example. When you do so, however, you're able to produce something that kind of looks like this. So this is kind of a busy slide, but just follow the green. This is basically the life of a single asset, whether it's a PDF of a battle card, whether it's a video file, whether it's access to a value actualization tool or subject matter expert. When we figure out all the different ways in which a specific asset can or cannot, most importantly, apply to the different people who sell for us, the different environments and customers and buyers that they face, we actually get the opportunity, as busy as this looks, to really narrow down the tagging and the association of content with selling situations so that the rep themselves is only given as much as possible the content that they need to have when they need it and where they need it. So in order to accomplish all this, just as we begin to wrap up, Kevin, I know we've got a couple of questions that have come in, so I want to get to those. Let's just take a look at the integration piece and make sure that when we govern and integrate our SAM with all of our other systems that we're understanding the right perspective. So first we have the Sales Asset Management Platform. Okay, great. Sales Enablement tends to procure that and launch it. But it doesn't sit by itself on an island. It has to be connected to the sources of a lot of the content, especially the buyer-facing content that lives in the content management, marketing resource management, and digital asset management environments. So that's there, but wait, there's more. Then we have to think about the internal content, the empowerment stuff, excuse me, that we've spoken about. This is where the learning and development folks in HR also need to be able to plug into the SAM environment. And then when we wrap it up, it all obviously has to, as we've been saying ad infinitum here, connect to the Salesforce automation platform. It's got to be mobile friendly. And at the tail end of the whole process, marketing steps back in. Since they're creating content and they want to measure its utilization, they want to measure its impact and customer engagement with each piece, they need to also be hooked up together. So this looks pretty complex, but when you have this environment laid out, you're much more able to make sure that you can develop sales enablement programs that look like this. You've got no more red, green, or yellow gaps, that throughout the entire buyer's journey, whether it's a seller, a channel partner, a field rep, a hunter, a farmer, a BDR, whatever it might be, that every sales persona is provided with a stage-specific set of options that help them understand what I need to use to learn and sell effectively at this exact moment in each of my individual buyers' journeys. Then finally, when you bring it all together on the dashboard, it's absolutely crucial to make sure that we look at utilization, because we all want to make sure that the utilization of our assets is high, but of course, the impact. This is just a sample look here on the right, obviously, but the whole idea is that advanced SAM solutions will analyze asset usage by the sales stage. They'll correlate it to conversion rates, close rates, and then the stages, also when the content's not utilized. It identifies patterns, it gets smarter as it goes, and all that machine learning behind the scenes help us get smarter and better as we support our sellers from quarter to quarter.
Yeah, Peter, to add on to that too with the dashboarding, it's become a priority, and it's no longer just a nice to have to be able to have all these dashboards in a mobile as well as a desktop platform. So you can kind of see some screenshots here to the right of being able to have all that information readily available on a smartphone, on a tablet, anywhere that you are. Those vital statistics and the access to assets is there when you need it. Also, too, for dashboarding, it's very important to have customization. We found that the stickiness with the indirect channel partners really comes when they're logging into a branded platform, and they have a portal that they can go into in this environment and really feel that they are enabled and they're part of even like the direct sales team. So making sure these assets are available anywhere, but then also making sure that you brand them and you provide that information back to your sales staff.
Precisely. All right, so good. So just before we get to the questions, Kevin, I just wanted to go back to our sort of agenda / takeaway slide. Hopefully you guys have gotten some better info today on some of the key items. So the takeaways are, again, what are the most important attributes for a SAM environment? We've learned about content creation, content management, content distribution, and of course content analytics. Auditing your content, it's kind of like going down to your basement. It's hard to just go down there when it's a big mess, but it's got to be done. But most importantly, let's change that event into a lifestyle, and every time we go downstairs, instead of throwing the item in the corner or on the landing, which is what I often tend to do, let's actually put it in its place, and everybody will be happier for the long term. Tagging content is all about the perspectives of marketers and sellers and channel partners to make sure that we actually are associating content with the right stage of the buyer's journey, as well as their personas and the products that we're selling. Integrating it with the learning management system, with the email client, of course with the Salesforce automation platform, crucial ways to make sure that the guided selling piece comes together. The dashboard should tell every individual stakeholder, seller, admin, executive, what they need to know. And we've all seen the green, red, and yellow, dashboards and speedometers and all those kind of things in all of our environments. Make sure that it's user-friendly because that's so crucial. Whoops, I just went out of full screen mode. And then finally, how should I make sure this works out for a channel organization? Content is the great unifier. It's what we all deal with day in and day out, both as consumers and as business people. But it's doubly important for folks who support disparate selling partners to make sure that they're delivering an experience as an OEM that makes them the choice. Otherwise, Kevin, obviously what's going to happen is people are going to sell for your competitors, and none of us want that to happen.
Absolutely. So, Peter, once again, thank you. A lot of great information there. Thank you for everyone for attending. Also, we'll be providing a recording of this along with the deck here within the next 24 hours. But we do have a few minutes before the top of the hour. Over on the right-hand side, there's a questions section, so we can go ahead and ask some questions. But if you're also looking for more information around sales asset management, sales enablement, or anything that we presented here today, feel free to visit mindmatrix.net, or you can contact Peter or myself directly. Our Twitter handles are on there, or even on the invite goes back to my email, so I'd be happy to clarify any things. But I think we do have some questions that came in during the presentation here. And Peter, I don't know if are you good to take a few?
Sure, let's go.
So one question that we saw come in was asking about the size of the organizations that use this level of sophistication, and kind of the where do you see a cutoff, or what size organization, what size sales teams, or how does something like this also help your sales team grow if you're not at a certain level right now?
Yeah, awesome question. Great question, Kevin, because none of us want to be in the position of saying to someone, well, you really need the Cadillac, but you may only have a Chevy Diet or something. There's no hard and fast number, but when we look at our survey respondents and we ask them yes or no, do you have a SAM in place? Typically, I think certainly anybody with 100 sellers or more is likely to fall into the range of organizations that do. There are a lot of ways in which organizations with 75 or 50 sellers can access some of the capabilities of some of the core SAM environments out there without going with the full-fledged deployment. Under that, obviously, the shared resources that we're all used to using, the shared files and the drives and the collaboration platforms, they're not awesome, but they are generally good enough because there is obviously some expense both in terms of time and money in deploying one of these. But I think generally that 100 level cutoff is probably what we would like to see.
Great. Peter, another question that came through asking about, do you have any data showing the effectiveness of certain content types?
Actually, we do. We divide content into two different categories, as I mentioned earlier: external buyer-facing content and internal empowerment content. On the external content, we actually have a whole presentation. I think it's available on our website as a webcast that talks about what winners do differently. And we mentioned some of that stuff earlier. Believe it or not, Kevin, the average winning seller of a B2B technology product provides 17.3 on average, obviously, pieces of content to the buyer throughout the course of their conversation. That's not marketing produced content. That's actually seller introduced content. At the education stage, the number one is, actually, sheepishly I'll say this, analyst reports. At the middle stage, at the solution stage, it's the discovery document that they work on, that they present. And surprisingly enough, at the tail end, at the selection stage, it's the contract. A lot of people don't, most people don't put a lot of effort into the contract. It's a very technical document, doesn't usually look very pretty, but it's actually very influential. From the internal perspective, during the education phase of a buyer's journey, sellers rely mostly on account planning tools. During the middle stage of the buyer's journey, they rely on objection handling tools. And finally, predictably, on negotiation planning tools for the latter stage. We do see that top performing sellers consume a lot more learning content before they get too deep with their buyer, and underperforming sellers go right at it. They go right at the buyer, then they realize that they don't know what they need to know, and they go back to the library a little bit too late and try to power up on those learning carbs, and it doesn't often help them out.
Great. We actually had a follow-up question that came in through with that as well. It was talking about whenever you do the assessment and the audit of your content, um, someone was asking how should we look into old content and what should be the quality or what would be the qualifier to remove unusable content or low-value content?
Depending on what somebody is using, Kevin, I would hopefully like just in the folder view to see when it was last touched, last modified, created. I would suggest be pretty ruthless. You know, you want to get a few folks from different perspectives involved, but if something hasn't been used in a year, get rid of it. I mean, don't get rid of it. Put it somewhere where people just, you know, would really have to work hard to get at it and clean it out. We've had a lot of customers talk to us about, you know, I know this kind of sounds like, you know, a commercial of for some sort of weird product, but, you know, oh, I had 2,000 pieces of content and now I only have 200 and I'm so much happier and, you know, I'm growing hair and losing weight. But, you know, the whole idea behind that is simplicity. But the whole idea is if you've got 2,000 pieces of content and 1,800 of them haven't been touched in a year, get rid of them, but take that 200 that remains and then get the input from the successful sellers and figure out what are 20 more pieces of content that we could use. And I think folks will generally appreciate it. You know, if in doubt, go down that Amazon experience, which is make sure that the searchability and findability is so user-friendly, as well as, you know, I kind of brought that up, and here in my home office, I'm literally looking at an Amazon box right now, that whole idea of people who use this content also found this content to be helpful. You know, we're all used to that in a consumer mindset, Kevin, but it actually works in a guided selling scenario for B2B sellers as well, and the same for channel partners.
Right. And I know that we have just right at the top of the hour. If I didn't answer your question or Peter did not answer your question, we'll be sure to follow up via email. I'm going to do one more, and it was a pretty big general question, but it's who in my company should own a SAM initiative, and what departments should be involved. And they were asking, is it sales, is it marketing, compliance, et cetera? Who are the people that should be involved in this initiative?
Sure. I mean, you know, my title that you guys saw at the top of the webinar is going to obviously influence my answer, so I'm going to say sales enablement. But, you know, organizations who are looking into SAM often will have their marketing folks take the lead on it. What's most important is to make sure that you get a lot of different voices. Portfolio marketing, sales ops, marketing ops, learning and development. Everybody who has the opportunity to create and send and provide learning and selling assets to the team should be involved in that. If it's a channel-centric organization, Kevin, definitely we want to get the voice of the customer. And when I say the customer, I mean our channel selling partners. The other thing about getting the voice of the customer, the sellers who are actually on the street, is there will be, let's face it, a little bit more credibility when things start to go out and you want to get that viral spread of, hey, did you hear about this great new thing that we have deployed? If it's already been grounded in some pre-positioned support, if you will.
Sure. Makes a lot of sense. So again, thank you everyone for attending today. The recording will be provided via email. I will also be including this sales deck. If you have any questions, though, please don't hesitate to reach out to Peter or myself. And we look forward to the next in these ongoing series of webinars. We'll probably be looking for something here in the next month or two. So keep an eye out in your inbox for the next invite. But again, thank you, Peter, for such a great presentation today and a lot of really valuable information.
Thanks to you too, Kevin. Take care.
Thanks, Peter. Have a good one, everyone.